You know this shape. Of course you do. It's friendly, it's iconic. It's the Volkswagen Beetle. For most of us, it's a symbol of peace, love, maybe even a movie star. But what if I told you the story of this car, the love bug, actually begins in one of the darkest chapters in all of human history? Well, the story of the Beetle is one of the most unbelievable paradoxes of the 20th century.
Okay, so first, let's just set the scene with the car we all think we know. By the time the 1960s rolled around, the Beetle had become this global symbol of the counterculture. You know, it was Herbie the Love Bug, a cheerful, optimistic little icon of peace and anti-consumerism.
And you can really see just how much people loved it in all the different nicknames it picked up around the world. In Germany, they called it the Käfer, which means, well, beetle. In Mexico, it became the Vocho. In Brazil, the Fusca. For millions of people, this little car was the face of flower power. It was quirky, it was reliable, and it was the total opposite of mainstream excess.
So, that brings us to the big question, right? How on earth did this humble little car, this global ambassador of peace and good vibes, even get its start? I promise you, the answer is not what you think.
Yeah, it started right here, with Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. The car that would become the Love Bug was born from the Third Reich, a project that was personally championed by one of history's most monstrous figures. This is the wild paradox we're going to unpack.
So let's rewind a bit. Back in the 1930s, Adolf Hitler had this grand vision for a new Germany, all connected by a brand new network of superhighways, the Autobahn. And of course, to drive on these new roads, he wanted a car for the masses.
And that's exactly what Volkswagen means. It literally translates to the people's car. But this wasn't just about transportation. Oh no, this was a powerful propaganda tool. It was a promise of mobility, of modern prosperity for every German family, all designed to sell Hitler's vision for the nation.
The man Hitler tapped to bring this vision to life was the brilliant, and I mean brilliant, engineer Ferdinand Porsche. Back in 1934, Hitler and Porsche met, and Hitler laid out exactly what he wanted: a car that was simple, totally reliable, and cheap enough for the average worker. And so, Porsche got to work.
But here's where the story gets really murky. There's this huge controversy around the design itself. A lot of historians argue that Porsche's so-called original idea looks an awful lot like a car already designed by Joseph Ganz, a Jewish engineer. Ganz had already built a very similar people's car. Of course, once the Nazis rose to power, Ganz was arrested, and his name and his contributions were basically erased from history.
So just as this dream of a car for every family was about to become a reality, World War II happened. And overnight, the whole project's purpose got twisted from a tool for civilian life into a machine for the German war effort.
You see, the car's official name back then was the KDF-Wagen, which stood for Kraft durch Freude, or Strength Through Joy. It was a Nazi slogan. Hundreds of thousands of German citizens actually paid into a savings plan, putting money away every week for their new car. But then the war started, civilian production stopped, and almost none of them ever got one. The promise was broken. Instead, that tough, simple design from Porsche turned out to be incredibly useful for the military. The chassis became the backbone for the Kübelwagen, which was basically Germany's answer to the American Jeep. And get this, they even made an amphibious version called the Schwimmwagen, a four-wheel drive car that could literally swim across rivers.
And this is where the story takes its absolute darkest turn. To build these war machines, the Volkswagen factory relied on forced labor. The company actually operated its own concentration and labor camps right there on its property. And to put a real human number on this tragedy, in May of 1944 alone, 800 prisoners were brought from the Neuengamme concentration camp to the Volkswagen factory. They were forced, under brutal conditions, to build the very machines that were fueling the Nazi war effort.
After the war, you'd think the story would just end there. The car was a tainted symbol of a horrible, defeated regime, and its factory was just a pile of rubble. But then, an unlikely hero emerged who would completely change its fate.
So the bombed-out factory in Wolfsburg ended up in the area of Germany controlled by the British Army. And honestly, the Allied officials had no clue what to do with it. The car's Nazi origins made it toxic. Many people thought the best thing to do was just scrap the whole project.
In fact, an official British commission basically called it a piece of junk. Listen to this direct quote from their report. "The vehicle does not meet the fundamental technical requirement of a motor car." They called it ugly and useless. The Beetle was this close to just becoming a forgotten footnote in history.
The whole thing was saved by one person, a British Army major named Ivan Hurst. He was put in charge of the ruined factory, and one day he found a working Beetle prototype in the rubble. He had it painted green and showed it to his bosses. He saw its potential, and he convinced the British military to place an order for 20,000 cars. That one simple, practical decision restarted the factory and saved Volkswagen from disappearing forever.
And with that single spark of life, the Beetle began one of the most incredible comeback stories in history. It went from a total pariah to a global superstar. And in the process, it completely changed its own image and, you could argue, the image of post-war Germany itself.
Think about America in the 1950s. The car market was all about these huge, chrome-covered land yachts. They were symbols of fantasy and excess. And then here comes the Beetle. It was the complete opposite. Small, simple, practical. It was like a little dose of honest reality in a sea of extravagance.
And the way they marketed it, absolute genius. Instead of trying to hide that the car was different, the now legendary Think Small ad campaign celebrated it. They took its small size and simple looks, things that seemed like weaknesses, and turned them into its greatest strengths. The ads basically said, "This is the smart, sensible choice in a world gone mad with excess."
And did it work? Oh, you better believe it. The world fell head over heels for this little car. All in all, over 21.5 million original Beetles were built. That makes it the most produced car from a single design in the history of the automobile.
And what's really incredible is that eventually more Beetles were built outside of Germany than inside it. I mean, look at this timeline. Production kicks off in South Africa in '51, then massive plants open in Brazil and Mexico, and the final original Beetle, it wasn't made in Germany. It rolled off the assembly line in Puebla, Mexico in 2003.
So we are left with this just profound legacy. It's the story of an object, a machine, that completely transcended its dark, twisted origins to be totally redefined by the entire world.
I mean, just think about this insane journey for a second. A car that was dreamed up by a dictator, built using slave labor, was then saved from the scrap heap by an officer from an enemy army. It was then embraced by the very counterculture that stood against everything its creators believed in. And somehow, through all that, it became a global symbol of peace and love.
The story of the Beetle is just this powerful example of how meaning isn't set in stone. It shows how culture can take an object and just pour entirely new values into it. And it leaves us with this really fascinating question to think about. Can any object really ever truly escape where it came from? And who gets to decide what it all means in the end?
Don't forget to like and subscribe for more How Meets History.